Hello and welcome to Cinecrisis. Today I am honored to have a very special guest on the channel, Trace from Pierce Productions. If you don't follow his channel, please check it out. He does a lot of great videos covering everything from movie reviews to movie history. And Trace is here today because we're going to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, the classic Universal Studios monsters. So Trace, welcome.
I'm glad to be here. Glad to be here. And it's with a topic that I enjoy, but you are a fanatic for it. You love it. So I may be learning a lot more than I thought about this franchise from you tonight.
I can talk about how I first got interested in these films, but why don't I start with you? When did you first see some of these movies, and how did you become interested in them?
Yeah. So the very first one I ever saw was The Wolfman, and I got introduced to that by my father. And that's one of his favorites. So that was one that he introduced it to me, and then that was always the one that we would rewatch together because that was his favorite also. And I didn't really get into the other monsters until a couple years later. I kind of just stuck to the Wolfman for a little bit. And so yeah, it took me a little bit while to get around to all the other monsters. And I don't want to give away just yet my thoughts on all the other movies, but I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, no, fair enough. We'll be getting into those one by one, the more premier classic titles. So for me, I'm honestly been trying to think about this. How did I first get interested in these movies? And I can't think of any one discrete, like pinpoint example. More kind of like a mixture of different things just from growing up. So one of the things I thought about is, we went to the Universal Studios theme parks a lot when we were kids. So one of the tent poles of those parks is the Universal Monsters. So even at a very young age, before I probably even knew who these characters were, I was exposed to them on, that level. So whether that be in something really silly and stupid like the Beetlejuice rock and roll show or the horror makeup show, or just seeing them, walking around the park. But that definitely played
And the
a role.
cafe.
Yeah, the classic Monster Cafe, which has horrible food, but always want to go in there just to look around. Like I just want to just sit in there, but food's terrible. Another thing that I thought about was actually when I was a kid, I was a very big fan of Scooby Doo. And Scooby Doo has a lot of the same traits and kind of trappings as a lot of these classic horror films. And especially, you don't realize it in some of the big movies, but when you start watching more and more into the weeds of some of these obscure movies, a lot of them are very prototypical kind of Scooby-Doo mystery type films. So it was kind of interesting as you look back. These are like more obscure titles, like Horror Island, I think is one of them that I see as a direct reference. There's others through the line, but those two. And then how I eventually saw them for the first time was on VHS. Probably, I don't remember why I wanted one, but we were in the video store and I came across, I think Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman was the first one that I ever saw.
Yeah, the obscured ones and the spin-offs I haven't been introduced to. I have the opportunity because I own some of the box sets. The only one I don't own is The Mummy, and I'll probably talk to you later about that. But oh, and Dracula.
Okay.
I just have the first Dracula because I'm really not a big vampire guy, so I didn't want to get the box set, but we can talk about that later. But I prepared by watching all like the main seven for this video, but upon doing that, I do want to dive deeper into these like spin-offs and part two, three, Wolfman meets Frankenstein, stuff like that. So I do need to check those out.
Yeah, absolutely. Those sometimes become more fun to rewatch as the years go by because some of those movies are just totally bonkers. You're wondering like, how did this even get made? Like especially what they refer to as like the monster rally films. Those are ones where they're throwing everything in the kitchen sink at this movie. So there's the Wolfman, there's Dracula, there's the Frankenstein monster. Then they advertise things like, mad scientists and hunchbacks and all this stuff too. So in the 40s, they were just trying to do these ones where they teamed up everybody. People don't realize, or some people do, and it doesn't go acknowledged as well as maybe some other things do, that the Universal Monsters was the original shared universe. Before Marvel Studios, before DC films, This is the studio where individual characters were introduced one by one, and then later on, through happenstance, they just decided, hey, why don't we have Dracula and the Frankenstein monster and the Wolfman all in the same movie. Obviously, they started with Frankenstein and the Wolfman. That would be the first movie, but they eventually all kind of teamed up, except for the Mummy. The Mummy never crossed over into anything else. I'm not sure why.
I hope that for modern audiences, they're able to try again with the whole MonsterVerse that they tried with Tom Cruise. I actually didn't mind that Mummy as much as everyone else did. I know a lot of people hated on it, but like the idea behind doing the shared universe and trying again, I was actually for modern audiences was actually really interesting. And whenever you do a remake, this is science. Whenever you do a remake, the originals always, always, always get a boost in interest. And if they would have kept going with the Mummy and then maybe, I think there's a rumor that Ryan Gosling's supposed to do like a Wolfman movie, stuff like that. Those older movies would get more attention from people my age. I'm in my early 20s because my friends, they're not going to sit around during the week and watch these old black and white movies. I'm the weirdo out of my friend group. But with the reemergence of these monsters, I feel like that these older movies would get more love.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was, again, I think the Mummy, the Tom Cruise Mummy, it's not a good movie, but is it as bad as everyone made it out to be? No, it's just a very mediocre action film that had nothing to do with the Mummy. I don't think that was the right like idea or story to launch this with, but I did appreciate the sentiment of what they were going for. And they had plans to do, like you said, I think the Wolfman, but also was it Johnny Depp going to do the Invisible Man? Was that it at one point
Yeah,
too?
he was gonna do that, and then Russell Crowe was Dr. Jekyll and
Oh,
Mr.
that's right.
Hyde, which I thought was cool. And even in that scene, you can see Creature from the Black Lagoon's hand. It was like little Easter eggs and stuff that they were building towards, and I appreciated that,
Yeah,
but
no,
not
same
everyone
here.
did.
They did do the remake of the Wolfman though. I think in
That
2010.
was in that was in 2009 though,
Okay.
but they were trying to do something new, starting off with The Mummy with Tom Cruise. But because of the success with The Invisible Man with Elizabeth Moss that came out, I think last year or the year before, because of that, Ryan Gosling, I'm pretty sure he has a project coming up with The Wolfman, but it's not going to be like a shared cinematic thing. It's just going to be like a one-off like they did with The Invisible Man.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I haven't been following all that stuff, but the problem is every time you try to do it very manufactured, like the Dark Universe was very manufactured, even to the point where they had the logo at the beginning of the movie. You're almost doomed for failure. So it has
So
to kind
why
of.
do you think so why do you think in the 30s and 40s they were able to, I don't want to say succeed because obviously I wasn't around in that time period, but if you look at the box sets, there are so many movies, and so there had to be some form of success for there to be that many movies.
They
So
were
why do you
wildly
think
successful, wildly,
so
absolutely.
why do you think it succeeded then but not now?
Well, also these movies, the original ones, they're actually horror movies. The Tom Cruise Mummy was kind of just generic action movie, and that's the problem. Is I think they're trying to make it more like Marvel than Universal Monsters, and that's where the problem I think comes down to it. If you actually did something that was actually along the lines of a true horror movie, then maybe there would be some potential there. Spend less money and have not take as huge a risk, and you could maybe churn out a few more of these and experiment a little bit. But yeah, I mean, Dracula and Frankenstein both came out in 31 and were a huge revenue profit for the Universal, which was not a major studio at the time. And they kept cranking them out until I forget the year exactly, in the mid 30s, when horror movies just as a general rule became taboo. There's a lot of censorship with production codes and things like that. So there was no kind of appetite or audience for them anymore. And then they came back in a big way in 39. I think Son of Frankenstein being one of the chief ones to kickstart the second wave into the 40s. And then they died out by the end of the decade, where
Well, when did Black Lagoon come out? 54, right?
yeah, Black Lagoon is the tail end of the Universal Monster cycle, the very, very end. And that's that kind of like transition period where you're going from the classic gothic horror, like Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, etc., to the 50s kind of sci-fi monster on the loose kind of movie. So it historically gets roped in with the classics because he's more anthropomorphized. He walks. I mean, he can swim. He walks. He's more humanoid versus something like a tarantula or the deadly mantis or all those other ones like that. The Land Unknown. They're all these like sci-fi big bug, kind of movies. Or the Mole People. The Mole People sometimes gets roped into the classics too because they're more humanoid. But that's where the genre ended up going in the 50s, but the creature had that unique point like in the transition zone. But yeah, that's at the very end of the life cycle. Let's go into the films individually then. Why don't we start with the earliest example in the talking era, which would be Dracula, 1931.
Okay.
So was this the first time that you'd seen this, or you've seen this one before?
I had seen it before when I was a lot younger. I'm 24 now. If I had to take a guess, early teens is when I first watched Dracula. And when I was in my early teens, I didn't appreciate films as much as I do now. And I've never been a vampire person. I'm not into vampires at all, TV shows, movies. It's just not for me. And the thing about Dracula is I think that I just watched it maybe too early at an age that I just wasn't able to appreciate it. And I'm building it up because I watched it for the first time since a teenager, and I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I remember. It's not my favorite, but I was able to enjoy it a lot more and dive into the story. And I forgot that Van Helsing was in there and stuff like that. And so when I saw him on the screen, I was like, oh, cool. And Bela Lugosi was very suave as Dracula, and he was just a cool guy. And I don't know. I think that I was just maybe too young to appreciate it. I enjoyed it.
Dracula is one that I had on VHS. I watched it a lot as a kid, and I did not really care for it that much when I was a young kid. It's a very, very quiet movie. I mean, this is like pretty close, as close to the earliest level of talkie that you can get. This is like 1931. So Todd Browning, the director, especially, was not a very adept director. I mean, compared to James Whale, who did Frankenstein and Invisible Man, you watch those movies are contemporary with Dracula, and they're like in a totally different league, a totally different world in terms of like skill of the director. So Todd Browning didn't really know what he was doing. I mean, to a certain extent, he was a silent director. But so that means that movie is very, very quiet, very still. It's very slow. So I think that's something that as a young child, you're not going to appreciate. You're going to find boring. And it's certainly one that as the years went by and I continued to rewatch it, I enjoyed it more and more every time. I mean, I consider Dracula to be one of my absolute favorites. It's definitely in my top 5. And like you said, Lugosi is a huge reason why. He is among I would say, the top 2 horror actors of all time. Him and Vincent Price are my top 2. So Lugosi's performance as iconic as Dracula, as the Dracula, Edward Van Sloan as Van Helsing, that's a very interesting performance. It's like super slow and deliberate. His dialogue, his the way he enunciates his words. And then I think the standout performance, besides the 2 that I just mentioned, would be Dwight Frye, who played the character Renfield. That's Dracula's the realtor who goes to Transylvania at the beginning, and then he becomes his bug-eating, sidekick and protector, I guess, during the day.
Let me ask you a question about Dracula, since we're on the topic that I don't remember. Since when did Dracula be able to turn into a wolf? Has that always been like one of his superpowers, or not superpowers, but one of his powers? Because like he's talking about Renfield's in the asylum or whatever, and he's talking about wolves and howling, and I'm like, since when is Dracula a freaking wolf? Like, when did that happen?
As far as I know, I mean, I don't know if it predates in the novel or any other kind of legend or lore, but yeah, it's always been part of that one, and it's not one that's I think commonly used in many other, you know, different adaptations over the years.
Can hypnotize people. They have to be allowed to enter like a house or something like that. They have
Yes,
to get
and that's not in
permission.
here. That's not featured in here.
Yeah, that's not in there either. The mirror thing, that's how Van Helsing
That's in here, yeah.
started to figure out, okay, what's going on with this guy? And he's looking at the mirror. Yeah. So I just thought that I would ask you because you're more of the expert. So I thought maybe you might know about the wolf thing.
I feel like I've seen it in other movies, but I can't particularly think of one on the top of my head right now. Um, the other thing I would say about this movie is that it is highly quotable. I don't know if that's just me that I've seen it like a million times and I've picked up on certain lines, but I love certain dialogue in this movie, just especially when Renfield first arrives at the castle in Transylvania. Even something like, I am Dracula, I bid you welcome, and, listen to them, children of the night, what music they make. It's just very, very, I think, of iconic dialogue from this movie.
I think you're on your own with that
Yeah, I absolutely adore this movie. I think it's wonderful, and I try and get as many people as I can to see it, but it's a tough sell. It's a tough sell. Just based on its age, I think alone is a huge factor for a lot of the reason people don't want to watch it.
one. Agreed. Yeah.